Good evening and happy Sunday. I hope you all had a good time worshiping the Lord. And we're back this week after a little break. We had our annual priests gathering last Sunday evening, Monday, Tuesday, into Wednesday morning, and so I was socializing with my brother priests because a lot of them are a long ways away, and I don't get to see them that often. But I am back here tonight, and got some things I want to try and tie together. As always, leave some comments in the stream or hop on and ask questions. Um, Happy to hear from you. So, I want to start off with one of the definitions for religion that St. Thomas Aquinas gives us. He says it's basically re legere, to read over and over again. He got this from Augustine. Uh, and in a religious ceremony, you tend to read the same texts over and over again. Every year when we celebrate Christmas, we read the story of Christ's birth. Every year when we celebrate Easter, we read the story of his resurrection, on and on and on. So you could think of one meaning of religion is the story that we are telling ourselves. The story that we are telling ourselves, where we come from, who we are, where we're going. I want to tie that in with a new word that's been coined recently by Michael Sartori. He coined this term boomorality, combination of the word boomer and morality, the sort of moral system that the people who are kind of in their prime, maybe waning influence, are operating under. And it seems to me that this boomorality and the story of that, the religion of that, is shaped by two events. One of them being the second part of the Great War, or World War II, as it's more commonly known, and the other one being the Civil Rights Movement. I don't want to talk so much about the Civil Rights Movement at this time, but I do want to take a look at World War II. Now, obviously, baby boomers don't have an immediate memory of this. Baby boomer cohort is usually dated 1945 to 1964. But, you know, the world that they grew up in, the world that they inherited, was vastly shaped by that. We can it's sensible to date that cohort, starting at 1945, because all of their parents would have gone through World War II. And, there's a fascinating story in one of Oliver Sacks's books about one of the patients he had who couldn't form memories after 1945. I can't remember if it was a stroke or dementia or a brain injury or something like that. He was incapable of developing new memories. He was permanently stuck in 1945. But he just kind of offhandedly mentions that people who lived through World War II, who put all of the effort into that, they were profoundly shaped by it. It seems like that was the most meaningful period of their lives, and everything after that was just a bit of a concluding action from the climax. So they grew up in the memory, in the shadow of World War II. Now, World War II being a massive sort of thing, I think a lot of stories that baby boomers would have heard from their fathers, even from their mothers, because everybody was involved in the war effort, is we did everything that it took to win that war. I think that would be an accurate way of describing how society reacted to this massive, massive, massive movement. That we did everything that we had to do this. And that everything that we have to accomplish this, that's a dangerous thing right there. That isn't actually a morally neutral thing, to be willing to do anything to accomplish a particular goal. In some cases, I'm sure it was quite good. I for the entire month that I was on the front, I only slept 4 hours a night because that's how fierce the combat was. Okay, well, we would look at that, we'd say that's heroic. that you would sacrifice your energy, sacrifice your sleep, sacrifice probably your long-term health for the cause, for the war effort. That's pretty amazing. I spent hours unpaid overtime in the factory in order to build planes, in order to build bombs, that sort of thing. That would be rather heroic. But I think there was something a little not right that got mixed in with that we would do whatever it takes in order to win this. And this could be a little bit controversial. So I welcome the controversy on this. I think the dropping of the nuclear weapons on Japan was probably a little too far. They were very clearly doing whatever it took in order to win. But the use of weapons of mass destruction against civilian targets is not good. You can't obliterate non-combatants in order to achieve a military end. That violates even the loosest notions of a just war. And this has been sometimes fiercely debated. Catholics tend to be more known for their controversial pelvic issues, but that's another one right there. We can't use weapons of mass destruction against a civilian population. That's not an acceptable thing. And I know many of you are probably thinking the same story that I was told when I was a teenager, that the invasion plans that the U.S. Had drawn up in order to invade the mainland of Japan were going to be even worse than the nuclear weapons. And so therefore using the nuclear weapons was better. And, there was more than two options at the end of World War II. There was more than two options to bring that conflict to the close. The U.S. had an option of not insisting on an unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender. Imagine Japan could have just become state number 51 with an unconditional surrender. We would have been able to do whatever we want. Now, as I think the historical record shows, we gave Japan a fairly fair shakeout. There was always a little bit of problems with an occupying army. You're never going to have zero problems. But as far as occupying armies go, United States occupation of Japan was relatively peaceful and calm. But they had no assurances of that. We could have offered them assurances. We could have basically offered them the deal that we gave them on the condition that they surrender. But we insisted on an unconditional insisted on an unconditional surrender. And I'm not sure that was, no, am sure that wasn't right. That wasn't good. And so we've got this story that we've begun telling ourselves. And the way the story ends in the Boomorality, the way the story ends is, sometimes it's okay to vaporize children. Sometimes it's okay to vaporize families. Sometimes it's okay to vaporize an entire city in order to get the job done. That's a sort of civilizational story that baby boomers grew up with. Why are we then surprised when the generation that came of age being told that sort of story would be the generation that brings abortion into the world, would be the generation that brings that heavily supported Roe versus Wade, that was campaigning for abortion rights in the more progressive parts of the United States? Because sometimes it's actually okay, according to the mindset of Boomorality, to get rid of inconvenient children if it's standing in the way of something that you consider to be valuable. That's just a thought I had, just a theory I had. Yeah, I guess we'll just invite the controversy here. You go ahead and pop on in. You tell me I'm wrong about World War II, and we will see about it. Mark's already here to tell me that I'm wrong. I want to The story that was already in the Bible, God specifically told the Israelites to vaporize various peoples in the promised land. And he only did that a few times, and he hasn't given that order since. And so I don't see the United States having that kind of authority on their own. All righty, come here and tell me why vaporizing children's good, Mark.
Well, here's the problem. The XJ plans, if you've ever read them, I mean, that was going to happen anyway, for real, right? Except we would have lost everybody who was a veteran fighter in the war in the East. But way more importantly, your story doesn't line up for the following reason. The people that got abortion passed and civil rights passed were all the rebels against their boomer parents.
Against their boomer parents or silent generation parents?
No, it was all young people.
So we're starting the cohort at 1945.
Yep.
We're starting the cohort born in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying by the let's say
the boomers caved to their children is what happened.
In 1974, right? So we've got a baby boomer born in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
All right, they get up. Let's say they have children at the age of 20. They begin having children. So that's 1965. So you're telling me in 1974, the baby boomer parents were caving to their 8-year-old children.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, and also, who's in charge at that point? It's not the baby boomers aren't in charge. They're not running the government. So it's not a baby boomer problem anyway. The baby boomers run the government in the 80s and 90s.
Right. And I'm looking at the formation they received as they were coming of age.
But all the things that happened before them. But it's not their formation. It's literally the rebels that rule the roost. Like the better story, the more accurate story, and you see this culminate with George W. Bush, which is why I particularly don't like him, which has zero overlap with why Democrats don't like him, by the way, like actually zero, which I think is hysterically funny. Cave to the left, cave to the left, cave to the left. The left are the draft dodgers in Vietnam. The left are the hippies in the 60s. The left are the people in the 50s who felt that their affluence was somehow a bad thing. Like it's a subset problem, right? That subset doesn't correlate with generations at all. So history almost never aligns generationally with historical events. This is a very recent way to think, and it's completely wrong, except for generation. I think it's the millennials. I might be wrong about that. I gotta do all the math again in my head, and I can't do math, so that's not gonna happen. I'll have to sit down and think about it. Until very recently, the generational split didn't actually work. So whatever generation Tim Pool and Carl Benjamin are in is the generation where the generational split works. Before that, it actually doesn't work at all. So it ends up being the rebels and the children. And the rebel children motif is everywhere. So the most famous piece for the rebels and the children is Helter Skelter, right? It's Charles Manson, right? So everybody believes Charles Manson is an evil baby boomer, but he's not. Like he's way older than all those people, right? He manipulated them.
Yeah. Imagine having a much older man, manipulating everything, right?
Everyone misses. Yeah, but he's not an older man of his generation. He's an older man who rebelled against his generation. And so it's the rebellion that explains all the problems, not the generations. The generations actually don't explain the problems. So you end up realizing that the baby boomers come into power and they have the opportunity to reverse these bad temporary things like Roe v. Wade decision. Anybody who knows a lawyer, you just go talk to your lawyer friends. Worst, shakiest legal decision the Supreme Court ever made for real. Like there's so many things wrong with it legally that it's kind of bizarre that it lasted so long. It got held up by the baby boomers because their children complained. And because they had a vested interest, because it was their children they thought they were saving from teenage pregnancy or something, which was another great big lie everybody was told. Teenage pregnancy is not the evil that they portray it to be, right, at all. And it was the norm up until, basically the baby boomer generation. So it was actually the norm. And so, none of that works. But this is a big trend, blaming the baby boomers for absolutely everything, when they've all stated publicly, we really want to retire from office, and positions of power and running companies, but actually we can't find anybody to replace us. And that's actually technically true. And in areas where they have been replaced, so let's say Hollywood. Yes.
Hasn't been going well.
Now you have the competency crisis, right? Yeah. Everybody in Hollywood, the incompetency in the hierarchy is so high, and Critical Drinker and company talk about this all the time. They're not so puzzled that somebody wrote a woke script or put woke characters or any of that. They're puzzled at how the management of the operation at Disney, for example, or any of these other companies, read the script and thought it was okay, right? Because that requires incompetence at 2 layers of a hierarchy, or maybe 3, in fact, right? So there may be a malicious actor, like, you could go in and say, well, Bob Iger's actually a malicious actor. That actually might be true. There's a lot of evidence that that's true, right? He just has an agenda. He's not trying to destroy Disney in that way. He's trying to force in the age of gnosis, sort of, the world works this way. Let me show you, if we just change these parameters in the media, everybody will act the way we think they will act. And then, of course, that just loses money and doesn't work at the same time, right? And so, like, he's an actor, right, in that way. Like, he's an agent of that sort of change for a particular telos or goal, right? Make final cause great again. But the people below him they wouldn't even agree with that necessarily. They think that's how the world works, and they're too incompetent to notice this is dumb. Of course, no one's going to watch this show. Like, of course not. Like, what numbers, what data is coming into your brain that makes you think what you're doing is going to be popular, when any idiot off the street, literally now, actually could show you that this is never going to work. But that's how bad things are. Like, we've got incompetence all the way up to maybe somebody even running for president who apparently actually has a 78 IQ. So my 85 was very generous and apparently incorrect, but that's a different story for another day.
Unfortunately, I missed your stream on Friday because I was hearing confessions. So, literally absolving people of their sins takes precedence over your channel. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry.
What?
Yep.
It's just, I'm offended.
Yeah, I just so I'll just tell you what kind of prompted my thinking, and maybe you can help me make sense of this. The pro-life movement, Catholics across the nation, all of these things, we've been working so hard to get Roe versus Wade out of the way, because it was an extraordinary act of judicial malpractice, as you've said, and it really kind of stifled the conversation. And now we're in a position where we actually have to deal with, like, regular old politicking again. Got to deal with public opinion, people's formation about that. And, as it turns out, Catholics are once again kind of a minority on this. Haven't really been able to hold the evangelical Christian bloc together on this. It seems like, and this is just my perception of things, it seems like a lot of people just don't care. They just don't care that abortion destroys a human life. As long as we do it early enough in the pregnancy, they're not going to raise any objections to this. And I'm just wondering, like, was this a special moral formation I received that gave me that kind of...
No. This is actually just a misunderstanding. So, as a professional data scientist, as I once was, I can tell you that was never the case ever in the numbers ever. The numbers on abortion have been extraordinarily stable since the 1950s. 80% of the population of the United States is a no. That's not the issue, right? The way they ask the question, and this is why you have to read polls, You can't look
Okay.
at poll results because they're
Rather than
completely
articles
meaningless.
about the polls.
Right. You can't read articles about the polls. You've got to actually go look at the question they asked. So it turns out that when you do the digging, what you find out is the largest polls, and the correct polls are, do you agree with this? Right. What they ask, and this is where the numbers get close, although they're still on the no side, by the way, and they always have been. And anybody who tells you differently is flat out lying or misinformed. I don't care why you're lying. If you're lying because you're ignorant, you're still lying. Sorry. No points for from the pragmatist. It turns out that they ask whether or not the government should tell women what to do, right? Or whether or not to have one. And the answer there, even there where you would expect it would flip to 80-20, it doesn't flip. It goes to like, I got to remember, I think it's 45% are okay and like 55% are not or something, but it's much closer. So that's always the number they use. But actually, abortion in the United States is completely uncontroversial. 80% of the population's a no. Just
Like
flat
a
out.
no
Like if you just
on all, or like a no at a certain point.
Well, there are almost nobody is a no across the board.
Right, so
Everyone's got
that's the
medical
Catholic
exception.
position. Oh, okay, medical exception.
Everyone has medical exemption, and not everyone has rape exemption, which I find utterly fascinating because there could be
Right.
lots of different reasons for that.
Well,
But
I
that's
wouldn't
actually
want.
what the numbers have always shown. It's just they never report it that way because they love
Right,
to lie about these things.
I mean, the medical exception for me would be something like, I wouldn't want a doctor to be prosecuted for removing a fallopian tube during an ectopic pregnancy, and
Well,
wouldn't want that.
No. Most people, because of the age of gnosis, because it is belief in knowledge as propositions, and propositions is the highest value, they buy, whether you agree with this or not. And I'm not stating a position. I'm just saying they buy into the idea that you can know ahead of time what the risk is, either to the mother or say to the mother and the baby. Because a lot of people would be like, I'm a no on abortion if it only kills the mother. Okay, like that's your position. That's fine, right? Like, I'm not gonna say that's the wrong position. That's for sure. But it's much less clear when you start asking, well, what if neither of them would survive because of pregnancy? Well, they buy into the idea that that's possible to be known, and that we actually have a science to back that up. I'm not sure that's true. It could be true. I'm not making a claim. I just would never bother to research such a thing, because the problem with goofy stuff like this, and it is goofy, is we're already not under 10%. We're at 1% maybe. And
1%
of pregnancies having.
Right. So hard cases make for bad law. That's an old Roman legal adage right there that you can add to your repertoire.
Right. And you will notice that the left, the whole trick of everybody on the left, or the so-called
hard cases.
There are always exemptions. There are always outliers. There are always what if and what abouts. And they're always tiny numbers. Tiny. They're usually under 1%. And it's kind of like, yeah, there are going to be exceptions, and we are going to make mistakes. What do you want me to do about that? Do you want me to inconvenience the 90% of the population to save the 10 or the 7? I'm not changing I'm not changing what 90% of the population does to help the 7% of the population that has a mental illness, for example. That's not happening. I'm not going to pass a law because people misunderstand the law. Like, and just because there's a law against it doesn't mean it never gets done and there are no exemptions or exceptions to law. That's not how that works.
Or the judge can't modify the sentencing based on the circumstances.
But it never reaches that. See, people misunderstand how this works. It never reaches that level. Like, this is where when people go in about, oh, we've got people in federal prison for marijuana. No, you don't. You have them in for lots of things, and they pled down to marijuana. I've read a bunch of those cases personally myself. That's always the case. Why? Well, and I've lived in neighborhoods and watched the cops. People smoking joints on the street, and they don't even bother to arrest them. They don't care.
Fish, man, that guy, fish to fry.
Well, that guy doesn't do anything else that they know of. If he's not dealing heroin and cocaine, if he's not a gun carrier, if he's not in a gang, the odds that you're walking down the street smoking a joint and the cops are going to nab you are almost zero. And I've seen it hundreds of times because I knew a lot of drug users who were mostly harmless.
Even if the cops do have an interaction with you, they might just take the pot and maybe give you a fine.
Or they could take it up to the next level, right? And this has happened to me actually. And the attorney general could go, "This isn't worth our time."
Yeah.
Right. And so like they think like, oh, if you pass a law, this is going to happen. Almost never happens. Like people who break laws almost always get away with breaking the law. It's very rare that somebody gets pinched for a legal violation. And that's actually why most people who make it into the court systems are on a raft of charges, right? Or have a rap sheet or something, right? Because nobody's going to pinch you for a small little thing. They're just not going to. It's not worth their time.
They're not going to get you for going 3 miles an hour over the speed limit.
No, I thought I was going to get pinched today. And I was like, what's going on? I think the cop was just in a hurry to get into his little thing. And I was like, what, dude, you're going real fast. I might be going a little over the speed limit, but you're smoking it. Like, what's happening? Because he wasn't even in my rear view. So I don't even know where the hell he came from.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was doing like 50. And I'm like, the speed limit up the road's not 50. Slow your roll, dude. But yeah, but he has lights. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Do I speed to get out of his way? I don't know. What am I doing?
Go off to the side?
Now there's no side on these roads. You've been here.
Okay, yeah, one of those roads. I guess your little car wouldn't handle sides very well.
My road, not my actual road, further down in Richland County, because I was coming from civilization. But no, the ditches over there. There's no room on that road to pull over. You know, you're not pulling over. But I didn't know if he was trying to pull me over or what he was trying to do. And I was coming up on this. It's this little development. It's a tiny one. But I figured like he's going to pull me over there and I can pull in and there's plenty of room. But he was going there. I was like, oh, all right, whatever. I don't even know where you came from though. Slow down. But yeah, I mean, the number of times is just insane. I've watched people walk down the street past the police station, smoking a blunt, drinking a beer. Yeah. And if the police know you, especially, and they know you're not a troublemaker, they're definitely not going to waste their time, and every once in a while you get a jerk, right? You get some guy who's gung-ho, Mr. Cop, but these are exceptions, and people point to the exceptions and go, therefore we know what the rules should be. And it's like, oh my God, you don't understand anything about the world. Yeah. You need to just go away. But also we like clean, bright lines. I mean, I like them more than everybody else combined for sure. But like we get caught up in this. Well, the generation, and it's like generations just don't explain many things in history. It's very hard to find correlation between generational changes and historical kairos moments, or whatever the hell you want to call them this week. It's just very hard to find. But there are generational impacts. It's just that they usually don't have one clear effect. Right.
And so like my dad doesn't know if he's a baby boomer or Gen X because he was born very, like right at the end of what we call the baby boomers, and maybe even, but depending on who's counting it, he's actually a Gen Xer. But his old man fought in World War II, and they both lived through the Great Depression, so he like had that cultural formation. His older siblings fit squarely into the math, so it's
right. But it's usually much more local and much more relevant factors, like rebellion is a big one, right? Because it's hard to like, okay, so we have a lost people talk about the lost generation, with respect to the Great War. And thank you very much, by the way. That was very nice of you. So the Great War, sure, but like you can go back to like Napoleon. Where's the lost generation problem in that period of European history? Right, it's not so clear, is it? It's really not clear. And is the problem you're identifying due to the lost generation of the Napoleonic Wars a problem with that, or much more likely it is a problem that the aristocracy got beheaded by the French Revolution, and so you have a lost generation of leadership and people trained in leadership?
Yeah. I wonder too how much of our generational a generational mindset is a factor of, let's say, mass media formation, right? I mean, you look at like the viewership
Pop
statistics,
science. It's all
right?
pop science.
Well, you look at the viewership statistics of something like The Fugitive, right? Like, I only knew the Harrison Ford movie, but did you know there was a TV show,
Yes,
right?
of course.
Okay. And like 1972, like 80 million people watched
Oh,
the
really?
season finale of that. It only
Wow.
got that record only got broken by MASH.
Oh, that
Right?
makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
everybody watched MASH a
Yeah, right.
million
Everybody
times.
watched MASH, right? And so
Yeah.
you actually had like an entire nation all sitting around, but watching the same story. At least that bit of my spiel
Yeah,
should be
yeah.
correct, right? Having the
Yep,
same
that's
formation
correct.
there, and they all have this sense that we're all in this together. And now that's all
Right,
starting to fall apart with the fragmentation of media. You know, it's like, oh,
right.
I don't really watch TV, but I have my YouTube channels that I follow. You know, it's either like really nerdy philosophical stuff or really nerdy computer stuff. Take your pick. Um,
Right. Right. No, I
yeah.
wanted to
So
address this. The last generation did pretty damn well after the war. No, the lost generation were the dead people. They didn't do well after the war. But the argument can I'm not going to make this argument because A, it's either evident to you whether or not it's correct. And B, I just don't care because there's a much larger history to the argument. But the argument would be we lost all the good men or all the men capable of leadership in the war. Now, this
mhm.
is a very common historical argument that gets made after large conflicts. And depending
And the
upon
plague.
what you think, well, but it depends what you think evidence is as to whether or not you believe it. Um, there's a there. Oh, also, that thesis is part of the justification for allowing rebels to rebel, right? Because oh, look, we lost all the and then a great leader emerged, sort of garbage, which is usually not what happened. And then what ends up happening is because we don't have war anymore post the last conflict of the Great War or something. I'm not saying this is a correct thesis. I'm saying this is actually a thesis that people believe and have written about. Because of that, we need to stir the pot the way we're stirring the pot. Say right out of my brain, civil rights. Thank you. There it is. Thanks, brain. A little slow tonight. The civil rights movement did, because that's what's pointed to as the mechanism of the civil rights movement, roughly speaking, is, oh, we've got a great leader in Dr. King, and therefore. Now, that's not entirely wrong, we'll say, but there was a lot more to it. And all the important things had less to do with that than you would imagine. And much more to do with things that were going on among the I don't like this term, but maybe the WASP class, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, uh, uh, we'll say Puritan administrators or something. Although that's not close enough to accurate, but it gives you the flavor. There is a ruling class in the United States, right? And there certainly was one post quote Camelot, but even pre Camelot for sure, but post Camelot with the Kennedys. And that definitely happened. And then what ends from that is this conclusion that the rebel Martin Luther King did something and they killed him for it, which is very suspect for lots of reasons. Which is not to say the CIA isn't a rogue organization that should be eliminated from the planet, but that's a different discussion entirely.
Yeah.
Also, Lost Generation if you read history, Lost Generation isn't used the way we use it. That's just American snobbery at some point, which I do believe exists, although not where the Europeans think it exists.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Yeah. It's all very interesting. All complicated.
Well,
I
I like
sleep well
actually.
myself, so.
Burn Power has some good stuff on this on his Anadromous channel, right? I think I've talked about this before. Is how we got here. I
Mhm.
actually like the thesis that he's laying out, even though I disagree with a bunch of things he says. I like that frame. I don't. I don't use that frame in that way. But it's not a bad frame, actually. This idea that it's trauma from the Great Wars or the Great War is not a bad way to think about it. Yeah, well, Corey. Well, this is the actual historical lost generation thesis is everybody gets traumatized because they lost a generation, right? Like all the mothers are traumatized because they lost children, and all the fathers are traumatized because not only did they lose children, but they usually lost the eldest, right? And so this is something that happens with the Kennedy family in particular, right? So they lose Joe Jr. to the war that Joe Sr. was trying to prevent. He was very so like you can look. I used to look at it and say, well, FDR was pretty smart. He kept us up. That's bullshit. FDR was very dark person. If you saw a positive in FDR, that's a false positive for sure. It was Joe Kennedy, Joe Sr. that kept us out of the war, and a couple of others. And that was actually the correct move. And at some point, I don't know if he switched his opinion or what happened, but yeah, war became a sort of inevitable at that point. But it just looks like FDR was really clever in his timing or something, and that wasn't what was happening. But you wouldn't have seen that at the time. And this is usually where we get confused about the world. And ironically, so I wasn't feeling well for the past few days. So I was like, I need a movie. And Critical Drinker had reviewed The Beekeeper. And, he's like, oh, it's a fun romp, explosions, people dying, that sort of thing. And I was like, I just need something I can shut my brain off to. Man, that was not the right movie. Because it starts out slow, but like he's actually doing something in the film and you don't know right away what's happening, especially not with Critical Drinkers review, because you're like, oh, it's a Michael Bay, 80s Die Hardy, whatever. And all of that is there. Also, the best social commentary of all time. It's wrong because flat world, age of gnosis, the whole 9 yards. But man, does it capture what people are talking about? And I was just blown. And it's the very end. Like it's good up. Like it gets better at the very end of the movie. Like at one point he says, "You have to decide if you're for law or justice." And I'm like, yes, this is great. This is phenomenal. This is exactly the conversation we need to have. Also,
that's what we talked about in the very beginning of General Norms 1 at Kennan Law School, the difference between law and justice. And which one of these is higher,
Right. Well, and that's part of the whole driving theme. And then there's all this. It's weird because there's a woman and she keeps getting not really promoted, but like she's at the bottom and she keeps getting put in charge of larger and larger things, although not really, which is even funnier. And also for no good reason, because the reason's actually not well established in the film, because you can't do the pattern, right? They keep trying to enact like the girl boss pattern or the Mary Sue pattern, whatever you want to call it. And it never works because it can't work that way, which is just hysterical to me. And so you see all of this unfold in The Beekeeper. I'm watching it as it goes on. I'm trying to shut my brain off because I don't feel well. And as it goes on, I'm just like, nah, this is like the best freaking social commentary movie that's ever been made. This is phenomenal. This is totally a movie of its time. And it's not self-aware enough to realize that. But it's also completely wrong. But there's some good stuff in there. Like, and even in the beginning, you've got the wasp thing. Like it's right there. He's got money. He's protecting this child who's not actually his. I mean, it's so deep. It's like, it's not even his kid. What's going on? And the way he sees the world is totally different from the way everybody else sees the world. So you actually get 3 different worldview perspectives in the movie. And it's just fantastic because they're right there, well contrasted, and they're well done. Like they're correct. The vision of the world is wrong, but the perspectives are actually correct. And the idea that we'll say people with lots of money like just work differently in the world because they don't actually care about money because they have it. It's very hard for people who haven't actually had millions of dollars to understand. It's very much the way the world works. That's why hierarchy is important, and maybe being born into one and being trained as though you're part of it is actually a better strategy. And if you ask me, all the evidence says that, and none of the evidence says anything else. But oh well.
Oh well, indeed. Oh well, indeed.
But these things are hard, and people want simple answers, right? So a lot of people will grasp it like, oh, there's a generational divide, and therefore it's like, but that's the simple man's version of what's actually happening. And if you formulate your problems on that, and John Vervaeke talks about, proper problem formulation. Unfortunately, he can't do it, so it sucks to be him.
Nice to be able to point to a problem.
You can't. Well, except they don't, right? They point to what they think is a problem, then it ends up, no, that's a side effect or something that is inevitable, like hierarchy. I mean, this is one of Peterson's great messages. Hierarchy is older than trees. The Pareto principle is real. You're not getting rid of either of them. That's good to know, right? That's good to know. So the hierarchy goes like this. Yes, it does, right? And it can't do anything else. Okay, we better adjust to those things instead of trying to adjust those things to the flat equality doctrine world, right?
And as you know, I'm all into equality. That's my favorite thing. I talk about it all the time. Which is why, during Mass with the bishop today, I let the altar servers tell me what to do. I did not. That did not happen. That is utterly fictional.
Yes.
It's utterly fictional. Now,
you are ensconced in the hierarchy quite nicely, and signaling it well with your garb, by the way. Well done.
I do what I can. I noticed something.
I'm not giving up on the badness of missing things like book clubs and my live streams and stuff, but that's just me. I'm not in the hierarchy. I resist.
So I noticed something really interesting. All right, so it's a Nintendo game that just came out. I haven't played it. I've seen reviews. I've seen gameplay. And we'll look at Nintendo's strategy for the past decade, which has paid off handsomely for them. Is get this, Mark. You're not going to believe this. They just make good games that are fun to play. And nobody cares that they're playing them on an underpowered tablet from 2015.
You put words together, but I don't think they're real words.
Right. And when I heard this game announced, I was like, oh no, not Nintendo, because this was the first Legend of Zelda game that you actually played as Zelda instead of Link. And it's like, oh, what are they doing here?
Yeah.
Turns out Zelda can attack things with a sword. She's not very good at it. But what she can do in this game is she can summon all sorts of things, right? She can summon tools, and she can summon bad guys who will go off and fight for her.
There you go.
And so, correct. I know you look over at Japan and you say, everything's kind of rotted there, but when it comes to making money, they're still going to manifest the patterns properly.
Well, and that's, I'm listening to this video. I haven't finished it. Jesse Jesse makes me do a lot of things. Jesse's making me listen to this video on things like basically cultural propaganda, right? It's weird. I was talking about this like 4 hours ago with somebody. Have you been to a Thai food restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. American Thai food has nothing to do with food you would eat in Thailand.
I have no trouble believing that.
Almost all of those restaurants are actually funded partially by the Thai government.
That's amazing. I tell you what taught me this, right? Was going to a Chinese restaurant in Rome.
There you go. That'll do
it. Went to a Chinese restaurant in Rome, had no idea what I was eating, because this was not the Chinese food they serve us, but they just took all of their ideas and just kind of oh, this is how the Italians do it. So you even have the menus laid out the same way, the antipasta, the prima, the secondi. It was fascinating. I'm like, okay, so I already knew this, right? I understood it intellectually in principle.
Right, but until you do it.
But until you actually experience it, that combined with going out with a Chinese seminarian and having him start to speak Mandarin at this restaurant, and they bring out handwritten menus for him, and then we eat it family style. It's like, I actually kind of like this, but it's not going to hit that same spot that big tray of General Tso's chicken that's been sitting out for 2 hours hits,
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's so. American Chinese food is basically Polynesian fusion. Weird. They don't have General Tso's chicken in China, so.
No, I'm sure they don't.
But that's all this cultural war, this cultural propaganda that has been exported from the East. And Japan does much the same thing with anime, which is the thesis of this. I think this video is like 3.5 hours long, and I just have to watch it in chunks because it's going through a lot of stuff. I got to slow down that stuff. And that factor is important, but Japan in particular is at the end of the meaning. Like they hit the meaning crisis at about 120 mile an hour, and that thing wasn't moving. But they still have hierarchy, which is actually and this is, I mean, he talks about this in the video too. Like that's actually part of why we had to do what we did with the unconditional surrender. Because effectively what was happening in Japan was the emperor, like the emperor is the head of all the pride of the country, is maybe the best way that goofy Americans can think about it. Now he wasn't so set on war, but his generals were, but they had already convinced him, and he didn't. There are two strategies, right? One is die with the country or kill yourself and let a new leader get out of it. Like that's the only two modes I think that they can do in the East. That's China, Japan, that's a bunch of the countries over there. The people that we had running the country back then actually understood some of this mostly correctly, and that's why they did what they did. We don't understand this now. Geography of Thought, Nesbitt, Corey's favorite guy. Great book. Will give you a flavor for how stupid you are about the East and how you can't be smart about the East because it's just not actually possible. But I like it. I like it. Yeah, I go to Rome and I experience real Chinese food, and that's how you know things. You don't.
I don't think it was real Chinese food. I just think it was Chinese food they were making for Roman people.
It could be. It could be. I don't know if they culturally adapt in Rome, in Europe in general, or not, but they might. I have no idea.
They laid the menus out like exactly using the exact same terminology that an Italian menu would use.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So it's like, and like, the orange chicken actually had an orange in it. That's so weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like you just got to think about it this way. Any restaurant that sells food that the locals don't like isn't going to succeed. So all of the Chinese food we have is food that the local Americans like.
Well, to some extent. I mean, they really knew how to play on and this is, I mean, Corey makes this point all the time, right? Like they really understand us in a way that we don't understand them. And so this idea of this cultural propaganda, he had a better term for it. I can't remember it. This idea of using cultural exports for propaganda just kind of spread and seems to be highly effective. And Japan just happens to win because anime and the history of anime that I'm learning is totally fascinating. It's really interesting. Yes.
They put this TikTok.
Yeah, among other things. But yeah, that whole thing kind of started from Japan based on they're switching up strategy and to some extent trying to get into cognitive warfare. Trying to get back in the globalist game and understanding a better way to play it. Unfortunately, they hit the meaning crisis in Japan full speed and they ain't coming back from that. So I didn't realize, like, they had a lot more companies that were huge and now they've got Toyota and that's it. Like everything else is completely devastated. It's really bad over there.
So Nintendo having the second best selling console of all time still isn't moving the needle for them?
I don't know how big Nintendo is, but that was originally one of the, like, they had something like 6 of the top 10 companies in the stock market or something for years, right? Like they were huge. Japan was huge. They were doing really big work with Sony and Nintendo, and What is it? I can't remember the other,
Philips?
Fujitsu or something. One of the big electronics ones. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
still have Fujitsu around. I mean, they bought all the uh, instant film development patents from us too. They had their own, but they bought all the Polaroid stuff. I know that because I worked at Polaroid.
They seem to have a
Um,
lot of good engineers as well. Like the Sony comes up with a better way to build color TVs that are will
they
give you a crisper picture, and they can actually manufacture them affordably.
Because of the way they think, they're better at copying things, and
Copying and improving.
they're terrible at innovation. Terrible, like freaking catastrophist nightmare. That's the Middle East too. The Middle East is generally just terrible at innovation. And this is wrapped up in geography of thought. It's a deep argument. I'm not even prepared to make it. I'd have to reread the book. It's been years. I think I read it shortly after it came out, in fact. Um, yeah, there's a there are reasons why, and a lot of it is built into their quote philosophy or metaphysics or whatever they're calling it, their spiritual and religious traditions. Um, Hierarchy, yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, Japan in particular, right? Like their hierarchy is only healthy because our military took them over and showed them how to do hierarchy the American way. So on the one hand, they didn't actually get American culture. They got American military culture. And especially
Ooh.
at that time, that is a very different thing. Like there
Mhm.
is almost no overlap between American military. This is why right? Until very recently, we'll say the past, like, I think it's 15 years, but I could be missing, that it was all Republican, right? The military was all Republican voters, 80% or 85%, something completely outrageous. Um, it's a very different way of thinking. So Japan inherited all of that. There's one general in particular, Corey, you probably know his name off the top of your head, and I don't remember it, who kind of rebuilt the country. And because he rebuilt the country, they have a very warped idea of how we do things, but they know us better than we do because they just take our stuff and improve upon it. And there's a lot of evidence for this. Like, for example, little known fact: Japan actually has American factories with American workers in places like Tennessee and Kentucky, and those cars are higher quality than the ones made in Japan or the ones made in Detroit. I'm just saying. And except for one of the shops, which I think is a Toyota shop, they weren't union. And the Toyota shop's only union in the past like 10 years or something. Union shops are bad. They make bad product. We know why, by the way. So I was in a union. Unions are horrible. Horrible, horrible. They just, yeah, they're awful. Uh, so that's part of the problem, is that there is this way in which if you give them a pattern to follow, they're way better at it, and they'll improve the pattern in ways that we cannot. So they do make better engineers because engineering is more about following, quote, the science. And they are able to improve things because they see in cyclical patterns, which might be the problem with the US, is that we've lost the ability to inform ourselves poetically with poetic information, which would allow us to see patterns. Although I got to admit, Ben Shapiro talked to Jonathan Pageau. That came out today. It's free on
Oh,
YouTube.
the
Yeah,
Sunday
it's part of
special,
his.
huh?
Yeah, it's his Sunday special thing. Um, and I was pleased that both of them were using language that you would recognize, that I've been using for 4 years. So, yeah, I mean, Ben Shapiro comes right out and says, "Yeah, there's a creation that pre-existed us, and we were dropped into it." And it's like,
I mean,
thank you.
that's a Jewish doctrine too.
Yeah, but he's never said that before. I used to follow him quite closely. He's never understood the problem at that level before. So the fact that now he's seeing it at that level, or close to anyway, I don't know that he's actually down there yet, is a really good sign from my perspective. And especially that he's talking to Pageau in that way. I thought that was good.
I'm sure Peterson's been bothering him to talk to Pageau for months now. That's Peterson's favorite thing, is to tell people to talk to Pageau.
Well, they sat down at the table together, I think, for one of the Exodus follow-on things or whatever thing they were doing.
Mhm.
And he's gotten way better at communicating. Although, and I have, oh yeah, I have to do all the work. I forgot to do my video release work tonight. I've been doing the commentary on Pageau and Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke, and that first video has been pretty well received. So I'm going to do the whole stupid thing, which is going to be 4 parts because I can only do like 25 minutes a shot, and A, I'm burnt out, and B, I'm frustrated, and C, I want to shoot many people. Like really bad. But even that, you can see where they're not seeing stuff. And then in my commentary video, I'm going over. I've recorded 3 of them so far. Well, one's out. I've recorded 2 others. I got to do the 4th one. I'll probably do it tomorrow, actually. Assuming I feel better. That watching, because I break it down, but 2 of my commenters, I feel like my YouTube channel's over now. I don't need it anymore. 2 separate commenters on that commentary video were like, I've just realized that I get infected with these bad ideas and I need to slow down and maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And I was like, that's my whole message. Thank you. I'm glad you got it. See you later. Bye. Don't listen to these people. Right. And not Pageau or even Hall in particular, though. Jordan Hall still, he gave me one great insight though, which was really, really helpful. Actually, it's sort of, I felt really dumb afterwards. I'm like, I guess I overestimated people by a margin there. But he's still talking a little too high. But I think it's because he was with Vervaeke. I think if he's not with Vervaeke, he's not going to stray back into his balloon territory again. But he did a really good job.
Yes.
Yeah. You think I talk abstractly? Why don't you go listen to Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke, and then we'll chat. I'm way more understandable than those Muppets. Man, they go so far up the they go so far up the stack. It's like, what are you guys doing?
You got to be careful when you're up there, gotta have the right language. You gotta have the right posture. You gotta have a little bit of reverence, right? It'd actually be great if you were able to practice embodying those things. That probably in a community with somebody who's been like properly vetted and oriented and has somebody else looking out over them.
That's the only way you know things.
These highfalutin ideas are really well, they're dangerous because it's easy to be wrong and it's easy to mess things up. That's why when I'm doing these open mics, I'm a lot more exploratory because I know that I'm going to have people coming in and correcting me, and this format here is much more open to a little bit of error correction here. Whereas when I go up on the pulpit, I'm just sticking to the gospel because like that's what I'm qualified to talk about, and that's
right.
That's what's safe. Although today was Jesus teaching on divorce, and I had to preach on that to a congregation that doesn't know me at all. So we just had to go very slowly and delicately, and
tiptoe through the tulips, huh?
Tiptoed through the tulips. Yeah, I didn't hear anything bad. We'll see if any new letters show up in my file, but maybe we'll just get an angry phone call.
Good luck.
I won't be here when it comes in because that'll be on Monday, and that's my day off.
Oh, excellent. Lucky you. No, that's the only way you know anything is by participating. And the problem is when you start reading stuff and listening to these videos where you actually don't know what these people are saying, but you think you do, which is way worse. I'd rather be like, I don't know what they said. That's slightly better. But usually you think you know exactly what they said, and that isn't at all what your brain is concluding. Believe me, your unconscious is very good at rationality, better than your conscious mind is. And it's dangerous because until you actually participate, I saw Jordan Hall was posting on Twitter today. I guess he's in either North Carolina or Tennessee because he's helping out people in Asheville. And I was like, well, this is wonderful. And that's probably why he's able to talk more grounded now. And grounding super important. We on Market Wisdom Discord server, we talk about grounding all the time. It's super important. And we have methods for that, right? But the problem with
run an electrical, you run a copper wire down into the ground, right?
Pretty much. But the problem with engaging with propositions in that way is you end up in your head. and casting fantasies on the world as to what people said and what people did. And that's most of the problem. Like a lot of people with me, I just go, when did I say that? To please quote me. And they can't. And I'm like, well, you obviously think I said something that I never said. Like, are you going to address that, bro? And usually the answer is they're not. They're just going to double
This
down.
fantasies thing is just a fundamental problem that we're going to run into, because we try and build maps, and sometimes the maps are going to be useful and other times the maps are going to be wrong. So it's just a matter of being able to, like, okay, let me just go see if this works. I'll try a safe intervention. Oh, turns out I was completely wrong about that. Let me readjust these things,
But they're not even building maps. That's actually the problem now. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Peterson's popular. It's maps of meaning, because people weren't building maps. They were living purely in fantasy land. And a lot of them still are. And then, as you well know, maps don't solve a problem. That's also in this commentary video on navigating patterns. By the way, they talk about maps, and then I go into where they're wrong about that and what they're missing. Not Pageau. Pageau's not actually missing anything, but he's trying to help Vervaeke out a bit. But like maps, and then there's models, slight upgrade, right? And then there's reality. So you need to mesh all of these things. But we are a nation stuck in fantasy land. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and he was like, well, I was looking into the P. Diddy thing, and he's clearly a CIA operative. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense, and it can't possibly be true. And the CIA doesn't work that way for various reasons. And he, he was
actor.
Well, I had to demonstrate it to him. I'm like, do you think Kamala Harris has an above average IQ? And he was like, yes. And I'm like, why? And he couldn't answer other than, well, she got elected. And I'm like, okay, but I remember when George W. Bush was president and his vice president, everybody kept saying he was an idiot, which is ironic because he wasn't, right? And they were saying the same thing about GW as well. They're like, oh, this guy's stupid. And they were just misquoting him. If you read people who were around him, they actually say he was often the smartest guy in the room and knew more about the subject than his experts did. The guy's pretty sharp. And if you've ever seen him, like I used to watch him on C-SPAN, he's a quick-witted, funny as hell, very smart guy. He was a very smart president.
We're talking W there?
GW, yeah. But at the same time, they're sitting there bragging that Dan Quayle got elected because he's from a rich Southern family, I think it was, or whatever it was. They had some story, right? Some waspy story where he's born into and he's really a moron. And I'm like, well, clearly you don't actually believe that the only way you can be in government is by being smart. And certainly if you've listened to congressmen ever for more than 10 minutes, that's not true, because most of them are lawyers that couldn't make it. And so I don't know what to tell you about
you
why
can make a lot more money doing torts.
Well, and they couldn't, right? They couldn't even ambulance chase well, which tells you about their competency level, right? And people don't understand that they're just holding these two views in their head at the same time, and we get enamored by the novelty. Oh, one thing is right here, and it's like, who cares? Like, again, that's an outlier strategy. It's like, okay, Hegel said one thing smart once ever. Also, everything else he said is actually wrong. Why wouldn't just throw the one thing out? It'll be okay. Like, it'll be better, right? And it's the same. It's the same with lots of things. Like, oh, this person did they do the right thing on purpose or by accident? Because that matters a lot. Because a broken clock is right twice a day. Also, twice a day. And, just because something's right or has some insight or whatever, that's a bad metric. That's how you get mesmerized and caught in a cult pretty reliably. That's actually how it works, right? I mean, if you've ever heard, like, I've been around people who were pre-cult and post-cult, for example, and out of cult, same people. And it's usually just one idea. It's one shiny idea that they get caught up in. And it's usually wrong. So, like, one of the tricks that Vervaeke sort of uses in this talk with Pageau and Hall is he says, oh, the Buddhists have prayer. No, they don't. That's a flat out lie. What they have, we would not recognize as prayer at all.
Right. No. It's
But he
the whole
lies.
point, the
He
whole
just
point
says
of
it's true. It's not.
yeah, the whole point of Christian prayer is that you are engaging with God who is outside of you and above you.
Well, it's a
With the
participation
church.
with something outside of yourself. And it may
Yeah.
not be a direct participation with God, right? It might be a direct participation with somebody interceding on your behalf, another person, a saint, an angel, right?
Mhm.
Jesus, right?
Yeah,
Which,
yeah.
we could go both ways on that, obviously. Or direct to the source, right? And
Yeah.
the Protestants have one. They've got one red hotline phone, and that's it, right? And it's all propositions. So they're
Yeah.
just missing a bunch of tools, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I guess I don't really know what Eastern meditation involves, but when you look at least the Disney World version of their beliefs, it really shouldn't be the same thing,
Right.
right?
No,
There isn't like a personal God in history the way we have it in the
Yeah,
Bible, even in the Quran.
they reject all of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They reject all of it. Right. Yeah. If you see Buddha on the road, you're supposed to run him over or kill him or whatever. Right. Like, it's like, what? And then, look into the life of Buddha and then tell me, is that really the guy you want? Is that your guy? The guy who left his family? Is that your guy? Is he the guy? Is he really your guy? Tell me.
Oh, gosh,
is he your guy?
he's just the first guy to take akathisia and abandon his family.
It couldn't be a more opposite story. Leave your family after you have a kid and become celibate and eschew all of your responsibilities as king of your kingdom. And a little girl saves you. Do you see any of those patterns anywhere with kids saving the world? Maybe in every piece of media you've seen, girls in particular, very Western Buddhist. And what I gave you was a Western Buddhist take. It's also exactly correct, by the way, from our framing. And it's unavoidable, I would argue, right? If you actually look into any of this stuff, you're going to find that story. It's a pretty big deal. And then they play the swap the Buddha game, because of course they do. And it's like, all right, but now you're just a polytheist. And then they can't get around that. So they go, well, but there's the 10,000 things, or, they've got a million of these stupid excuses. I've heard them all.
It's really interesting. So what do you think of the cultural relevance of Dune? Right. And I'm looking at the cultural relevance, not just box offices, because Avatar had huge box offices and no cultural relevance.
Well, I mean, it had a big cultural impact at the bottom end of the curve, where people were depressed because they didn't live in whatever the name of that world is that I can't remember.
Pandora or whatever.
Pandora, the most forgettable movie of all time.
You were just talking about the child saves the world motif. That's what happens in, spoilers are coming, Dune, right? And everybody dies, not everybody. There's a massive war that I'm reliably informed is going to kill billions on multiple planets. So is that like actually what happens when you put children in charge of these things? Is they get swept away by forces that they really can't comprehend or control?
They get possessed by demons, and then you have the competency crisis, because like Hollywood in particular, like, look, guys, I hate to break it to you, but like everyone dies young in Hollywood pretty much. And so like they had a gap and young people filled it. And those young people are the generation after the boomers. There aren't boomers running Hollywood. That's not what's happening. So why is Hollywood cranking out bad movies? It's the same reason, right? Why are boomers still holding on to powerful positions? It's actually the same reason, because they know there's no one that can take their place. They know it. They're well aware. If you're a good leader, you know who isn't. And you're not right 100% of the time, but you're right 99% of the time. And that's actually what's going on. So you're complaining, but actually you haven't demonstrated that you can run anything. This is why Peterson's clean your room. You can't even keep your room clean. No, really. What makes you think you can run a Fortune 500 company? Greta Thunberg is Moadib. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's totally valid. I think it's probably deeper than that. I really haven't done this is more a Jesse question. Jesse would know off the top of his head. He'd have a theory about this for sure. or Burn Power or somebody like that who follows media. I don't follow media. I never did.
I just saw the second one last night.
It's great.
It was fun to watch.
Movies are great.
Beautiful,
Gorgeous.
just gorgeous on the eyes. And
Yeah.
I think that Dennis
Villeneuve or something. Yeah.
Villeneuve, Dennis, the French guy. I saw a breakdown of the sandword writing scene where he's like, I'm not going to ruin this with dialogue. We're just going to shoot the movie and make it look cool and make it sound cool.
Well, that's the appeal of the book, right? So at the same time, all this is happening, you have this. So I don't know if you've been to StoryGrid. If you type in StoryGrid in Google, there's a website for StoryGrid. If you dig down into resources, I think it's hero archetypes or something, you'll see these little summaries of movies like Harry Potter and The Matrix. And I finally, Justin Wells is into StoryGrid. So I finally looked at this site and I read some of the movie descriptions. They're just like 4 or 5 lines, but they're meant to fit into his, no word of a lie, spreadsheet on storytelling. As a writer, I'm like, I've lost all hope for humanity at that point. I'm like, a spreadsheet for writing, really? Like, you're so wrong. Telling you you're wrong is a waste of my breath, right? The descriptions of the movies don't match the movies even a little bit. Like, they're massively wrong, like really wrong. And I'm like, oh my God. And this guy's followed, apparently, from what I understand, what somebody else told me, so take it with a grain of salt. He studied under the guy who studied under Joseph Campbell or something. And Joseph Campbell's just wrong about everything. I don't know what else to say. He doesn't even understand his own system. You can hear him in interviews not understanding Star Wars that he consulted on. Like, he just doesn't understand the thing that he helped to create, because his system is a system and therefore wrong about writing and storytelling. I don't know. All the good lines in Star Wars in the first 3 movies, by the way, are ad-libbed. You can look that up. They're all ad-libbed and none of them were in the script. That should tell you something about good storytelling. George Lucas is not one, by the way. Hint, spoiler alert.
He got ILM together.
He's okay. I mean, he's an okay storyteller. He's not terrible, right? But he didn't write Star Wars. Like, he didn't do it. Like, other people made that movie with single lines in some cases and with rewrites in others. And when he talks about the hero's journey, there's no such thing. This is just a ridiculous individualist frame. In the same way you misunderstand the Enlightenment, right? You put an individualist frame under the Enlightenment, you get all the bad things of the Enlightenment. I agree. Also, that's not the Enlightenment's fault. That's the individualism's fault. Where does that come from? Better question, right? Now we're hunting a real dog, right? So that engagement is all about the incompetency at all levels. I mean, this guy's making a lot of money, and I asked my buddy, I'm like, who is this guy? Like, did he write something? Because I've never heard of him. It's a little weird if he's a good writer that I've never heard of him. Not that I've never read his stuff. I don't read a lot, but like, never heard of is a big difference. And he's never written anything. And I'm like, well, why are people listening to him? Because he's got this system from Joseph Campbell's lineage or some garbage.
He makes people feel smart. That might be enough.
Well, he makes them feel like they can do a thing that they can't do.
Right, like, because the number of good writers in the world is vanishingly small.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really the problem. We've all been told that with the gnosis, with the knowledge, with the propositions, you can do the things. And it's like, that actually won't help you at all in most cases. Now, it's a good bootstrap in certain situations. But if you're not in those situations, you're just wasting your time, energy, and attention trying to, quote, know things that are never going to help you. And in the meantime, you could be learning things by actually participating with them. And oh, by the way, you'll have something at the end. Now, it may not be what you expect. It may be a bunch of knowledge that you get through failure, because that's actually how you learn. hey, maybe you'll build something beautiful with a bunch of people. I don't know. I hope so. I mean, that's what we do on the Mark of Wisdom Discord server, so it can
What you
happen,
going
right?
for?
Get a nice book club together or two, right?
Yeah.
So,
All of a
yeah.
sudden, I learned something fascinating. You were talking about ad-libbing movies. That The Fugitive, the 1996, 4, 6, somewhere in there movie with Harrison Ford, mostly didn't have a finished script
Yeah.
when they started shooting that. And basically, Tommy Lee Jones like took all of the police actors under his wing and like basically wrote that script for them.
Yep.
And you talk about a competency crisis. I'm sure he's a baby boomer, but I don't think it exists when he's in the room because he's really good.
Right. Well, and Harrison Ford is one of the ones who ad-libbed lines for Star Wars and other things. Harrison Ford had a lot of input with George Lucas in a bunch of
Mhm.
Lucas movies that no one knows anything about. And I'm
And
sure
you know what he
Lucas,
was before he was an actor?
he's a carpenter.
He was a carpenter. He was used to limitation. He's like, well, I'm going to try and make this acting thing work, but if that doesn't work, I'll be useful on set
He
at
knows how
least.
to build things.
Yeah.
Good carpenters are problem solvers. Like that's what they are.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, the Dune question is a good one. Like, what was the cultural significance? And I'm always like, I can't work this out, right? Did the art change the culture, or did the art reflect the cultural change? I don't know. Like, it's
Mhm.
way too hard to tell, I think. Maybe there's some points in history where you can discern these two things, but I doubt it. There's something to the idea of the zeitgeist, which really comes from Carl Jung's collective subconscious,
Mhm.
um, or unconscious, depending upon which school you like better.
Mhm.
But I can't work out which comes first, or because there's always people doing things, right? And so it's hard to know why even when people are right, why some things catch on and some things don't.
Right.
And when you look at that layer, which is hard to do, so when I lived in Somerville, Massachusetts, it was I think it was the third um, most populated city on the planet. Um,
Somerville, Massachusetts.
believe it or else, as listed, yeah, and it was the highest population of musicians and artists in the world by a long shot too. Like it just had everything in Europe blown away.
Just another
Um,
band out of Boston. Yep.
just another band out of Boston. Yeah,
Yeah.
that whole song is a lie, by the way. Yeah, that was one man putting together all the music and the greatest vocalist of all time as well. But they never toured. The first album was released strictly from his basement from stolen equipment from Polaroid Corporation. Uh, don't
And
tell
we're all
them.
grateful for it.
We're all great. Yeah, what a great band. But yeah, the whole story, like living in cars and all that, he never did any of that. None of them did. That's the funny part. It's hysterically funny. It's all a
It's a
fantasy.
great story, though.
Well, but you can see the fantasies already started by that point. This idea of living in a fantasy and then telling a story about your fantasy, about how you think the world works. And then right now, there's a big trend that I've been seeing, and maybe it's only me, but I don't think so. You got Rick Beato and you've got Adam Reeder on YouTube, and then you've got uh,
Dave?
all the documentaries over the bands, and you start to see what was happening at the time and how it was happening. And it wasn't happening the way we thought it was happening when it was happening. A lot of that stuff, like the first Boston album, is pure fantasy about how the music industry was working. Geddy Lee's book, My Effing Life, another good one. Like none of this stuff worked the way you thought it worked, ever. Like the quote music industry wasn't an industry ever. It was just random people doing random things, and the way these bands worked was very, very different. Like the way Metallica moved music, or the way Led Zeppelin in particular, because they actually built an industry for a while anyway. Atlantic Records, very, very different from how you think, right? Like Led Zeppelin was so big that they CDs didn't take off until Zeppelin was agreed to put their music on CDs. That's how much power they had over the same with cassettes. Like very, because they're outlier bands, right? They're the top 1%.
Yeah.
So it's and that's what's weird, right? You can always look at the 1% and go, well, they should move the world because the 1% moves the world, but it's a different 1%, guys. And it's a right. One is unstable and parasitic, and the other builds things. And so, maybe Steve Jobs, for all that I dislike him, should have had all that money based on every iPhone sold. I'm not going to say no. I've got one of these now. Thank you, Steve.
So how do I think that the music industry worked? Was it just a bunch of executives who decided what got popular? Was that the image I had in my head?
Yeah.
Rather than it being a little more like,
well, you play
bands actually had power and influence.
You play, well, no. It's way worse. Like you play at a club and then, you grind hard and your exec comes to your thing. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but it didn't happen to almost any of the big acts ever.
Right. That was executives probably trying to like make it happen. And
what
they were
happened more often was a guy became a fan and heard something who could tell patterns and said, no, this is good music. And then he'd go and sell other investors or existing small record companies. And then they'd agree to do this signing thing. But the number of bands that actually made it by signing is small. Most bands made it by grinding, never getting a record contract, and succeeding on airplay alone. And so it turns out that when that system was in place of airplay and the radios controlled the airwaves, then MTV comes along, and guess who rules the roost? MTV determines all the big bands all of a sudden, not the radio stations. So right in the middle of when everybody thought this is how it works, it wasn't working anymore. It was actually completely flipped. MTV was determining winners and losers from almost day one. Why? Well, because they had power. Why? Because they were in all the homes, because they were free on cable. Boom. Nobody knew. How does Metallica get big? Headbangers Ball on MTV. That's how they got big. Right. You can hear Adam Reeder talk about this on his channel, Professor of Rock. Really good YouTube channel. I don't listen to it that often, but some of the stories are just like, what? Just all kinds of, he talks about Country Roads. Country Roads was written by 3 people who had never been to West Virginia. Really? Yes, really. Right. And then weird stories. He's got great stuff. He's a really good researcher on this stuff. And he gets great interviews with people. Spirit in the Sky, he interviewed that guy. You'll never hear that.
Mom? Yeah, he just wanted to write a gospel style song, right?
Yeah.
This didn't have any of his deep seated beliefs or anything like that. And I could hear it, like,
he's a hippie.
As a preacher, it's like, no, Christians don't talk like that.
He's
like,
a goat herding hippie.
Say, I've never sinned, like
literally a goat herding hippie, lives on a farm. And the weird sound, one off, he doesn't know where the electronics are broken, I think. They can't reproduce it. He's had people try, and they can't make that sound anymore with the electronics we have available today. I think that's hysterical.
It's just
people
like
have no idea.
The Saturn V rocket right now.
Technology is fragile. It's unbelievably fragile. A lot of this stuff is just we have lost so much technology in the computer field that I know of. It would boggle your way more than we've gained. Way more. 2-3 times as much easily. It's weird. But yeah, you can't make that sound anymore. He's been trying. He's still trying, I guess. Yeah, his interview on Professor Rock was fascinating. But yeah, he's a hippie who owns a farm. And that's what he wanted to be. Fair enough. A lot of people floated in and out of the music industry, and they had one hit. That all they were looking to do is to see if they could do it. They're just talented people who are gifted, right, at lots of things. And they're like, oh, let's try this, right? And you'll notice most of them come from money. These are the hobbies of bored wealthy people for the most part. There's the hierarchy again. But you have this image that it's not, that he's scrapped and came from nothing, and that almost never happens. It happens, right, for sure, but it's very, very rare.
Right, like all of the foundations of the scientific revolution were done by rich gentlemen who were just, it's like it had the same kind of energy as oh gosh, like a D&D group or something. Yeah, we're just trying to outdo each other on this, and
Yeah.
we're just trying to have a good time here, rather than people who are like, I'm going to revolutionize the world. Like, well, you
Yeah,
did.
none of
You
them.
just you
None of them had that attitude, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's why you always have this fight between, we'll say researchers, right, scientists and inventors, right? Because it's the inventors who look at the science and go, "Oh, I know what we could practically use that for," and the scientists usually don't know or care, but sometimes they get pissed off because they didn't make any money on their finding, and then it's like, no, it's all about cooperation, guys. You got to get over it. If you don't have the skill of turning something into a product, then you don't have that skill and your value is less. Sorry. I don't know what
Watch
to
Real
tell you about how the
Geniuses. If
world is.
you don't think this actually happens, watch Real Geniuses. Or Real Genius. Real Genius.
Great movie.
Great
One of my
movie.
favorites. Yeah.
Very, very much worth watching, because yeah. Very well written characters, I think, for a ridiculous 80s comedy.
It is ridiculous, but also super fun and totally. Yeah. I mean, that's a movie that, like, it could have happened. Almost all of it. Like, a lot of it is just,
The popcorn scene apparently is a little physically impossible.
I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. Did Mythbusters do it or not?
Mythbusters did it.
Did they? Yeah, I thought they
Yeah.
might have.
Yeah. It's like, popcorn blowing up really can't generate enough force to actually blow out a window. And they
Right.
built like a window and put a bunch of popcorn in there, and turns out the
Right.
popcorn just gets compressed rather than blowing the window out. So it made for great cinema. I'm not mad about it. But the characters are like, oh, these guys were hanging out at MIT. 100%.
They were.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I knew people like that at MIT. Yeah. They're probably still there to some extent. Some of them are probably still in the basement. In fact, well, I think Stallman's still at MIT. What a weirdo. I like Richard. I've met him, but also what a strange duck. And yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially equating value with cash, and it's just a materialism all over again. A lot of people like to use mammon, right? But thank you, Father. Yeah, I do. Navigating Patterns is a video on what money is, and how this, and what economy is, which are just better ways to think about it. And it is this equation of your value with money that causes a lot of problems. I mean, a lot of academics are just, you can kind of hear it in them. Sometimes it's explicit. We should be making more money because we're wicked smart. And it's like, yeah, but you're worthless. Like, you can't do anything in the world. So I get the knowledge thing, but also it's not the highest value to me. Like, I want somebody who can bring me aid in the storm, like Jordan Hall. Like, I don't want your theoretical equations. That's not helpful to me.
I want somebody who's going to go up in a crane and fix the electricity.
Right. That's what I need, and that doesn't require book learning. So I don't know what to tell you about your value in the world.
I guarantee you, the OJT, like, they should do some book stuff, before they get up there. Like, hey, you touch this, you're going to die instantly. Make sure you have this turned off before you need a little of that book learning. But then you got to get up there and have, like, okay, see that? Don't touch it.
Well, you need apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is a better way to learn everything.
Yeah.
Just is. Like, you want to be taught something, apprenticeship is the way to go.
And you think you can actually have apprenticeship in a classroom? Is that possible?
Sure. Labs, chemistry lab.
I'm thinking of some of the very excellent teachers I had in seminary. And for these men, praise God that I went to seminaries like this. Their theology that they were teaching us and the life that they were living were deeply integrated.
Yeah.
And sort of the example that they gave in their teaching like had an impact and made me a better priest there. Now, maybe apprenticeship isn't the right word for that. Perhaps it's just exemplification.
Well, but
But I really felt like I developed good habits of thinking just by listening to them talk.
yeah, but it wasn't just by listening to them talk, right? Because you just mentioned
No.
how they lived,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I mean, this is why Girard is popular, and rightly so, although he's a scumbag and he's wrong about a bunch of things. But his talk about mimicry is great. Yeah, he's very anti-Christian, actually. He pretends he's not too. He's such a snake. Ugh. Yeah, I've got a video on that too, actually, with Justin Wells. Mimicry is important, and no one's talking about it. And mimicry is tied up in what John Vervaeke refers to as participatory knowledge, which is incorrect. It's participatory information, but close enough. We'll allow it. I use it all the time. But this idea of exemplification. So one of the ways it's done correctly in the classroom, and for some reason English teachers have a way of doing this correctly. I've told this story before, right? I'm reading Call of the Wild, and we get to the I forget, it's one of the early chapters. It might be chapter 2 or 3 or whatever. And the teacher comes in with a red sweater on, and one of the characters is the man in the red sweater. I think it's one of the names of the chapters, even. Right, the man in the red, and he's got a red sweater on. You know what I mean? Like he's taking the book outside of the book. Right. And also, what this is at Catholic junior high school. Read however many chapters it was and write at least one paragraph about what you read. That was the freaking assignment every night. That's how we read books. There was no reading of the book. It was read and then write and then get graded. And you better write well, because Mr. O'Rourke was a bastard. He was an Irish bastard. He did not care. He was there to
need to have at least
ass.
one English teacher like that. Now, Mrs. Garrick cared, but she also cared about you being good and didn't care about you getting good grades.
Well, Mr. O'Rourke cared very deeply, just not in front of the class. He'd pull you aside and you'd see a softer side, but in class, he was just a bastard. But I had another English teacher, and what he used to do is, he'd go through the book or whatever, and I guess I'll do the big reveal, even though it'll open me up to a bunch of interesting criticism. I was in the SPED classes because they didn't know what to do with me. So I was in the special ed classes in high school, and when I went to public high school, because they didn't want to pay for me to go to a better school. Right. So I was actually in the SPED classes with all the slow kids, which was hysterically funny. Obviously, I was extraordinarily bored when I went to public school. But my English teacher used to stop and tell a story from his life. Right. And at the time, they seemed like random, unconnected stories, but actually they were not. Now, the kids didn't know that, or most of them didn't know that, myself included, for a number of them. Right. But those little stories, right, were exemplifications of some of the things we were going through in the English class. It's not as straightforward as why proper grammar is important, right? It's not that, but also managed to exemplify why proper grammar is important and things like that. And the stories were like stories of his mother, or him when he was younger, or his grandmother, or, and things like that. And he'd make jokes. That was another method of exemplification of how the stuff is important. And as a child, you didn't get it. But later on, you did. And maybe you don't even know that's happened to you, which is definitely true. And that's where it gets fun. It's like, yeah, I can look back on some of this stuff. I mean, that's really hard because that's before time stuff, and I have bad memory with before time stuff. But I can look back and see some of it and go, oh, wow, this is all connected to the lessons.
Yeah. I'll tell you. When I was in kindergarten, we read this story about, I don't remember the name of the story, but it was this little girl who loved lima beans, right? But she was kind of embarrassed because, lima beans are green and you're not supposed to love those things. So she went around pretending that she didn't love, lima beans. And then one day she woke up and she was feeling sick, right? And so the little girl, their parents brought in the doctor. the doctor's like, I wonder if it's a bacterial infection. And all of a sudden she has lots of pus coming out of her. I wonder if it's a fungus. All these spores start, popping off, and it turns out these doctors, they're useless. So they get rid of them. Came with great visceral illustrations in this book, by the way. So they bring in, we're going to go into a little bit of alternative medicine here, so they bring in this hypnotist who's like, okay, I want you to imagine that you're just a part of the wall. And so the little girl becomes a part of the wall, and it's a real freaky picture where the windows are her eyes and the bed is her mouth, and then finally this little old lady shows up and says, I think you just need to eat some lima beans. And the girl's like, but I don't like lima beans. Like, are you sure? And like, well, okay, I'll try them. And she ate the lima beans and then she was better, right? Heard that story when I was about 6 years old, understood it when I was 16. Like, that's how long it took for me to get the moral of that story,
Right.
Fascinated by the pictures. The story really had an impact, but like, oh boy, being able to articulate the message of that story, that, if you decide that you're just going to be what everybody else says you are, then you're going to become what everybody else says you are.
Right. Yeah, it's good. I mean, well, there's usually not one moral in a story either, right? Or not a good story anyway. I think that's one of the things I think is a deficit when Pageau in particular is talking about fairy tales. The purpose of reading the fairy tales as children is not that they'll understand them in the moment. This is very age of gnosis. You have the knowledge and now you understand. It's like, oh, that's not how that works. Even a little bit, right? It's when you get to the point where you have eyes to see, having that information already conveyed to you and formed for you, by the way. That's, people talk about education. What they're usually referring to is formation, or usually lack thereof. That's very helpful, but it's not helpful when you get it. And people don't like that because we live in the video game culture, man. And people have come to expect, and they've been told stories like, well, Elon Musk is really smart. And that's how you hear Elon Musk talk about SpaceX. He's like, well, I know a lot about rockets, but these guys actually know about rockets. That's why I hired them. And which is not to say he doesn't flat out disagree with them and interfere and say, I want this type of rocket instead. Because he does. He has these deep arguments with them. But that interaction of pushing back on him is the thing that makes them better. Right? Like, yes. And that's not opponent processing, because that's just evil, by the way. It's cooperative processing, right? Because you're
on account of the shared goal.
The shared goal, exactly. Right. It's what Peterson talks about. Like, whether you're not really competing when you're playing hockey, even if you're playing hockey against another team, because you've all agreed on the rules and you've all agreed on the criteria for success. And so it's really a form of cooperation. And the fact that there's conflict, which is the better word, in the middle. Yes, conflict makes you better. Failure makes you better, because that's how you learn. And you can't learn any other way, by the way. So better get used to that too. Right. And nobody likes these messages, because of course not. We're used to being able to win the video game and see a playthrough on a video game. And that tells us how to know the video game well enough to win the video game. And that works for manufactured, carefully controlled systems, all of which are blowing up, by the way, because my goodness, tech is just disintegrating before our eyes. But it doesn't work outside of that. And then we want it to, so we retreat into our fantasies. So we're not even making maps of the world. We're making false maps of the world in our head. And then we're screaming at the sky because Roe v. Wade got overturned and the state you were in was too weak to pass a law. And I should tell you, that's how you really know what the abortion opinion was, right? Because the fact of the matter is, very few states, they all could have had laws in place, all of them. And very few states had any laws in place supporting abortion. So once Roe v. Wade failed, that I didn't see coming. Actually, I didn't imagine such a thing. But yeah, the minute it failed, a bunch of states already had laws in place to set abortion at the right level, we'll say, which is almost certainly not zero. I don't think any state has this fantasy that the leftists tell.
Well, what it is I think it's a lack of a discernment. And this is something it's worth there's a difference between a direct abortion and an indirect abortion. Direct abortion is you're going in there and, removing the child from its mother's body.
Mhm.
Yeah. Versus indirect abortion, where you're going to do something, and that's, it's to save the life of the mother, let's say, and that's going to result in the death of the child. We would call this the principle of double effect in Catholic theology. And so the classic example is an ectopic pregnancy, where
Right.
the child is implanted in the fallopian tube, cannot possibly survive there. So you can
Right.
remove that section of the fallopian tube, and no Catholic theologian would say that you're sinning in doing so, because it's
Right.
an intervention to remove a diseased organ to save the life of the mother. You can call that an indirect abortion if you want. And, I guess if we have to write our laws to make sure that physicians aren't ridiculously prosecuted for that, then fine. You can say, make an exception for the life of the mother and give broad discretion to physicians when they're dealing with this. A court should be able to manage that. I hope.
That's what courts are for. Like,
Yeah.
that's proper. Right. But they flattened it to abortion, made a
Mhm.
ridiculous definition of the term, where it
Mhm.
had no nuance.
Mhm.
They talk about nuance, but they're the ones that remove it from the world. You'll notice that pattern, especially on the leftist side. And then they use outliers, and they say, and therefore, and then they pass these broad demonic laws that are done by demonic possession for real. And that's how the sausage is made. Also, they're all bad people, and you should probably tell them that at the very least, even if you can't do anything about it. At least call out evil when you see it, because we're suffering from a lack of calling out evil lately. Let me tell you, this is
Yeah.
the stuff going on in North Carolina and Tennessee with the flood, and the feds are stealing people's stuff left, right, and center, and it's like,
Yeah, I'm sure that'll resolve the long-standing tensions between the Appalachian Nation and the federal government.
there's a bunch of people I don't think are going to be alive very much longer. There are officials they've been named in papers as having obstructed in obviously there's no excuse, right?
This
Obviously,
wasn't
there's
somebody
no.
made a mistake. This was, you
Yeah.
got any details for me? I haven't been following this closely. I've just been praying. So
There's a couple of guys. One in particular had a private copter out of Pageland, South Carolina, which is right on the North Carolina border by the mountains, actually. And he went up into this place. He was flying around with his son. They were dropping off stuff. It turns out that the efforts, there are people paying cash at the gas stations, at the airport gas stations, to fuel up choppers for people who are on rescue missions. So they're not giving their money to the government. They're not giving their money to charities. They're doing it like out of their own pocket themselves on site. Typically, yeah. Oh no, it's
okay,
wild.
all right. I mean,
Yeah. So
maybe not how I do it, but
he's
that's
got
how
a
they're doing it.
pilot's license. The guys, I think he was in the reserves, was a volunteer firefighter, and like a volunteer police guy or whatever. Like, he's got creds. Like, he's not some yokel off the street. And he's a helicopter pilot. He's got a small helicopter. The large military helicopters, A, are too big in some cases, and B, are too heavy. When you've got washed out dirt, you don't want to land a big, heavy military
A
helicopter.
Chinook on
and
that. Yeah,
rescue.
those are big helicopters. Yeah.
Some of them, even the small ones, are big and heavy, because military, of course they are. They're overbuilt. So he's got a baby 4-person chopper. So he's flying around with his son over this Lake Lure, I think is what it's called. And somebody's waving, and his son's like, no, it looks like they need help. They land the copter, very unstable ground, just enough room for his baby copter. And he leaves his son there and picks up the wife and leaves the husband there, because he's like, I don't trust the ground. I'm just going to take you guys one at a time. It's a 3-minute trip back. So he
I'm taking it this is an adult son.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he comes back, drops the woman off. Guy comes up to him and says, you can't fly there anymore. It's a no-fly zone. And he's like, he's a pilot. He checked. No, it's not. Like, what are you talking about? And he says, if you go back there, I'll arrest you. And I'm kind of like, well, he's in a helicopter. I don't know. What do you think is going to happen here, really? And then there's some negotiation going on, and he's about to take off. He basically tells the guy, listen, if you don't want me to save the guy, that's fine, but I got to go get my co-pilot. So I'm doing that. Like, screw you, go to hell. And the guys come over to him and say, listen, we can't tell you to save the guy up on the mountain, but if you land over here, we'll make sure you don't get arrested because we'll keep him over there. So the guys on the ground are like, not down with this. And he goes and gets his son. Is told over the radio he needs to go to some airport and meet with the FAA. And he gets to the airport, waits for an hour. The FAA never shows up because that's complete abuse of power. But they did put eventually, after he was gone, a no-fly. And I was like, so this guy knows people, and those people got to go too. That's all I got to say about like, these people can't be in positions of power. They can't. Like, we don't need any more information, right? We just need to make sure they never have positions of power again. Whoever collaborated with this idiot and this idiot, never again. Now, I will be surprised if his funeral isn't going to be in a few weeks, because you don't do that in Appalachia. That is not a thing you do.
He'd better be back in Washington, D.C. by now.
You don't collaborate with the feds, ever. Ever. That is a big no. It's bad enough you collaborate with the sheriff. You better not collaborate with the feds. They don't like the feds. Many a Fed has gone missing. For real. To this day, this is not an unusual occurrence. This is why the feds stay the hell out of Appalachia. So I don't know what this guy's thinking. Apparently there's been 2 of these well-documented incidents of similar, different guys. And Starlink, Elon Musk's post on Twitter, they've seized Starlink equipment from a private company. The feds have, and taken it. That's not going to go over well. A bunch of private citizens have said they've had resources seized. This is not going to happen. I think hopefully FEMA will be done away with soon. It's really bad. Really bad. I was just like, man, I'm surprised more people ain't dead. Although, who knows how many people have gone missing recently? I don't know, man. They went out with the crew, and they got swept up in a river, I guess. Okay. Yeah. Sure they did. I'm down with it. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. So, I hope nothing like that happens to poor Jordan Hall and his church, but that's been happening. It's well documented now, with multiple people kind of outing it in places like Twitter and other places where they can get away with it. But even the local papers and stuff are reporting on this. So yeah, prayers please for that area, because they're still devastated. I mean,
you must have only been caught by the edge of that storm.
Well, they got the eastern edge, which is the worst edge of the storm to get in this hemisphere. And because it came up in Georgia, so the Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina area. South Carolina, actually, the most people out of power, total people, because it went through Augusta, Georgia, and next to that is Aiken and North Augusta, both of which are actually in South Carolina. I don't know why North Augusta is in South Carolina, but they're pretty high population areas because they've got Augusta, and they're not too far from Atlanta, right? I think it's an hour and a half or something to Atlanta, or maybe 2 hours. It's not that far. So that's a fairly high population area. And then that's the beginning of the bottom of the mountains. And so the mountains get absolutely trashed. So there's a major highway called Route 40, which I've been on, and I can't go on it anymore. So you're not getting to Tennessee from North Carolina. That's my understanding. It might have changed, but yeah, I'm not taking the northern route up to New England the next time I go either, because it's going to be a while before them roads are fixed. I've seen some.
Yeah, mountain roads are just got to be a special engineering trouble.
Well, one road, I forget which highway it is. It's a highway I've been on. I knew the exact area because I've been on it a few times. I was like, well, so I think it's 300 feet to the river, and that all looks like sand and clay. So that road won't be fixed anytime soon because I don't know how you fix that. Maybe they have a way to do that. Mark is not a civil engineer, and he has no idea how you would even begin to fix something like that.
Yeah.
I would have blasted into the mountain to build the road, but I wasn't there. So, and there's a lot of blasting if you go the Blue Ridge Parkway. Blue Ridge Parkway is awesome if you like tunnels. There's tunnels all over the damn place. It's fantastic. But not that part. That part was, built right next to the ravine, and it's all washed out.
Yeah. Wow. Oof.
Apparently, you can't get to Asheville, North Carolina, or you couldn't a couple days ago. My buddy of mine who lives an hour from here, he just got power back on Thursday. So he was living, he was at his sister's house down the street from me, because an hour west, he had no power whatsoever.
People make fun of North Dakota for being cold, but there are no hurricanes here. You get the occasional tornado. Tornado can tear stuff up. It can be bad, but it can't do hurricane damage. That's something special right there.
The funniest thing I read, and this just cracked me up. Somebody wrote an article about how a bunch of people had moved into that mountain area to escape climate change. And I was like, I don't know which dumb is the dumber dumb, but we got a lot of dumb going on here, and I don't even know what to.
You moved to North Dakota to embrace climate change. It
There
feels
you go.
good when there's this global warming here. Like, can we have more global warming, please?
Exactly.
Oh, perfect. It's perfect. Well,
no one loves us, Father. It's very upsetting.
No. There's about a dozen people who at least love listening to us, but they're a little too intimidated to chime in. But that's fine. We had a good conversation. What?
By me?
It's your Yankee forcefulness.
True.
Yeah. But I slept poorly last night, so I'm looking forward to a good sleep last night. It was my fault, the guy I went over to watch the movie with, he has kids, so it's like we weren't going to start the movie until after the kids were settled down. So it's like, well, that's just one of the trade-offs you make. So yeah.
Well, sleep well, Father, and rest up. We've got a book club next week. I hope you won't cancel.
We should be able to do it
on us.
We should be able to do it. We should be able to get the Moby Dick book club back next week. It's just things have kept on happening in the afternoon. Sometimes that's just how life goes, but should have a free afternoon next Sunday for the Moby Dick Club. Moby Dick Book Club. It's dark outside, and rational creatures go to bed under such circumstances. So good night, and God bless you all.